Excellent. So again, first of all, let me just thank Debbie, Calvin, for helping arrange and inviting me for this talk here. It is truly a privilege for me to be presenting the work that has been funded by CCAT for the last several years, at least 3 years now, to come back to this community and give you an update on how things have been going. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I've collaborated on this project. This project is on motion sickness mitigation or alleviation via preemptive interventions. We call it PREACT because you act ahead of time as opposed to react. So we call it PREACT. My collaborators here include Dr. Monica Jones, who I'm sure all of you know very well, Professor Bernard Martin, who is from the Industrial and Operations Engineering Department, and my two PhD students, Dan Schurman and Nishant Jalgaonkar. And to be honest, what I'm going to be presenting here is the bulk of the work that they've done. It's an incredible team. I just get to present the work because I'm the best looking in this team. So I just happen to be the PI in this instance. And this is a very broad team effort. In fact, the folks that I'm not showing on the screen, and by the end of this presentation, I'll tell you about the human subject testing that we've been doing at MCity. In all, we have more than 30 researchers, graduate and undergraduate students who have contributed to the design, development, and the execution of the human subject testing that the results of which I'll be presenting today. So quite a bit of team effort. Now, the motivation behind this project has been just the fact that we were all aware of the incredible promises of ACES technology, autonomous, connected, electric, shared. And I don't think to this community I need to provide these numbers or these metrics, but just briefly I'll mention, why do we care about ACES technologies, in particular autonomy? Because more than 35,000 human deaths every year on the roads, more than 4 million injuries because of road accidents, the bulk of which are because of human error, and autonomy offers the promise of producing that number considerably. But beyond safety, there's also a significant amount of productivity or reclaimed time that is spent on the road. So American commuters spend more than 70 billion hours a year. Yeah, that's an incredible amount of time. And even if 1/3 of that time could be reclaimed in the form of productivity to be able to carry out tasks, that represents $500 billion in savings. And that's, again, one element. Another aspect is the amount of fuel that is spent on vehicles. Currently, it's about $500 billion in fuel that is spent in vehicles, and because of electrification, because of reduction in commute time, because of lower traffic congestion. Again, the expectation is up to $170 billion could be saved in fuel expenses. And then final point I'm going to make is there's up to 10% of US households that do not have access to any form of transportation. The future of ACES, future of transportation in the form of ACES, offers mobility as a service, and that brings equitable transportation to all segments of the society. But there's a catch. I'll come to the catch, but maybe as a summary of this, I'll mention that this Morgan Stanley analysis report showed or projected up to $1.3 trillion in savings, because that can be directly attributed to autonomous vehicles and autonomous and, broadly speaking, ACES vehicles. So substantial impact on the society. But the catch is, well, there's a human involved. There are the actual people involved who will be riding these vehicles. And the issue here that has been recognized, and again, UMTRI has been one of the leaders in this area, that the significance of car sickness in self-driving vehicles. This is a New York Times article. This is a Times article. Again, a lot of popular media around this that you see, and there are some very thorough studies that have been conducted. So this is a study coming out of UMTRI and focused very much on car sickness. The incidence of car sickness in autonomous vehicles There are extensive research publications that have come out that talk about, this as being a concern. So the catch is motion sickness, comfort, trust. These are key human factor issues that could prove to be a major barrier to the adoption of ACES technology. So while the technology development happens on these various aspects of autonomy, electrification, ride sharing, and so on, ultimately there remains a question. And that is a question that we're working to address. So what is motion sickness? Again, there's a certain sense that you might be able to associate with this. This is where a person sitting or standing in any moving platform gets a sense or a perception of motion through their eyes, through their vestibular organs, which are the inner ear, and through what's called the proprioceptive perception, which is just the sense of the body muscles. When the body sways, the body has a sense that it's moving. And there are numerous theories that have been developed over the years, and in fact, we're collaborating with Dr. Monica Jones on further pushing the boundaries of understanding the source of motion sickness from a very basic scientific standpoint. But in a simpler manner, perhaps I can point out. Here's a scenario that I'll paint. I'll show you. Perhaps a person who's sitting in a car and trying to read or trying to watch something on a device. So that describes perhaps 90% of all children in the U.S. or when my daughters are certain they have their iPad in the car, right? Now, in a scenario like this, let's see what's going on with the various senses. So the eye is focused on, or the eyes are focused on whatever they're reading or watching. So the eyes don't really sense much motion. Those eyes are kind of focused on that device or article that they're reading. On the other hand, as the vehicle accelerates and decelerates, the vestibular organs are basically accelerometers and rate gyros that pick up the movement of the head. So there is some motion that is perceived. And then if the overall body sways as the vehicle accelerates or decelerates, the proprioceptive system of the body picks that up. So what happens in this scenario is the eyes say, well, there's no motion. The head says there's some motion. And the body, when it moves, it says there's some motion. When there's a sensory conflict between these various sensory organs, what they're reading and what they are perceiving, that leads to a situation where the passenger can experience motion sickness. Another scenario, which is very common, is if you strap on a person with a VR headset, the person is not moving. So their head is not necessarily swaying. And the body is swaying maybe by their own volition. They may be moving their bodies themselves. But the eye detects a lot of motion. And through the VR, you can project and create an impression on the brain of the person that there's a lot of motion going on. So again, eyes are detecting motion. The vestibular organs may not detect motion, and the body, whatever sway there may be, it could pick up some motion. And again, once there's that conflict between the various sensory organs, that leads to motion sickness. So sensory and cognitive conflict, like what sometimes it's also where the brain is expecting and doesn't see, that leads to motion sickness. I'll admit, I'll make the admission, as an engineer, as much as I'm interested in understanding what the problem is, I'm very interested in solving the problem. And the one instance where we know the problem being solved or there's an effective solution was just comparing the driver and the passenger of the vehicle. Let's compare those two. So here's a scenario where, let's say, the vehicle is driving straight, and you notice a driver and there's a passenger. And if the driver decides to take a right turn, so the vehicle starts to turn right. As the vehicle is turning right, centrifugal effect causes the vehicle and the passenger all to get thrown to the left. With one exception, there's one exception in the vehicle, which is the driver, because they are the ones who initiated the turn. They actually lean into the turn. And then perhaps you have this experience yourself. If not, next time you're taking an exit and you're getting onto an exit ramp, you can notice that everyone in your vehicle is going to get thrown to the left. And you, even before you started the turn, you find yourself gently leaning into the turn. So what just happened here? You as a driver, because you are the one who generates or who creates this acceleration or deceleration, either by virtue of hitting the gas or hitting the brake, or by turning the steering wheel. Because turning the steering wheel, the moment you turn right or you turn left, you create a centripetal acceleration or lateral acceleration. So you as a driver are the person who creates these motion events. And it's because you know what you did, or what the consequences of your actions. The driver makes subtle preemptive corrections, and those corrections could be intentionally leaning their head or their body into the turn. It could mean just very gently tightening the core muscles when you put the brake. Oftentimes you find yourself pushing against the steering wheel. Why? Because you know that I hit the brake, and in a few seconds my vehicle is going to start decelerating, and that deceleration is called because my body to sway forward, and I need to do something about it. So you just tighten up your core muscles and push slightly against the steering. So what we find here is that there's a big difference between the experience of the passenger and the driver. And what is it that the driver did? The driver anticipated what's about to happen, and the driver preempted. They did something, even though it's very subtle, but they did something about it. And by the way, if you notice, my joyful family experiences, but the person who sits next to you is slightly more motion sick, right? If you're the driver, the front seat passenger is slightly more motion sick. The folks sitting behind are even more motion sick. And if you're driving a minivan, if there's a third row at the very back, those kids, you give them, the throw bags, because they're always complaining. And sure enough, because they have the least control over their body. They don't know what the heck is going on. They just sit there and their body gets swayed, their head gets swayed, but don't know anything better as to what to do about it. They end up getting the most motion sick. So that from a solution standpoint, that is what we recognized, and that's the idea that we latched on. So you can see in PRUACT how we try to recreate this idea of anticipation and the idea of preemption. So how significant is motion sickness? Let me just talk about that a little bit. 1 in 3 adults are prone to motion sickness. And right now in autonomous vehicles, people are not autonomous vehicles. Right now in traditional vehicles, people don't talk so much about motion sickness. The reason simply is that in the US, the occupancy of a vehicle is very low. So average occupancy is 1.5, of which 1 is the driver. Even in commutes, in most commutes, 3/4 of the time, the only occupant of the vehicle is the driver. So the bulk of the occupants in a vehicle right now are the driver, and therefore the complaint about motion sickness is not as much. But in an autonomous vehicle, every occupant is going to be a passive passenger, and if you now add on the layer of shared vehicles, right? So again, more and more occupants in a given vehicle, that is what brings up the concern of motion sickness. Even in traditional vehicles, like I said, every kid in the back seat, I can, the moms and dads who say that if you can fix this motion sickness problem for kids in the car, they would be very happy. And I'm one of those parents. I literally drug my kids with Dramamine before we go on any road trip, because we want them to literally get knocked out and sleep through the trip. So there's a need today, and there's definitely a need in the future when we have autonomous vehicles. So now existing motion sickness solutions, I just mentioned these pharmaceuticals, which really are not a fix. They tend to suppress the symptoms. They tend to desensitize your sensory organs. Effectively, the 3 sensory organs that I showed earlier, they tend to desensitize those. And then the passenger gets drowsy and so on, and this is fine in some instances. But if you expect to reclaim any of the productive time, then you don't want to get the passenger all groggy. There's also acupressure bands and so on that you go to CVS and Walgreens, you'll find these. And boy, in fact, I can tell you from personal experience, and there's published results that show that the only effectiveness of acupressure bands is the placebo effect. That if someone believes that it's working, then sometimes it works. If they don't believe it's working, then it doesn't work. There's no scientific cause and effect that is shown how this addresses motion sickness. It's also habituation. So Very important because especially with anyone who joins the military, if you want to go, if you want to fly a jet plane, a fighter jet, if you're going to go on a ship, if you're going to become an astronaut, then of course there is a self-selected group of people who inherently are less prone to motion sickness, but then they go through extensive training where you're subjected to these motion sickness inducing events, and over time you get more and more habituated. Which again, perhaps that is what explains that younger kids are far more prone to motion sickness, and as they get older, I think the numbers are along the lines that 1 in 2, or maybe at least half or 2/3 kids are prone to motion sickness when they're young, and as adults, that number comes down to 1/3. 1 in 3 people remain prone to motion sickness. Now, existing solutions, there's vehicle level mitigation that, there's route planning that you take a path that involves less acceleration and deceleration. There's adjustment of the driving profiles that you can do. So, especially in an autonomous vehicle, you stay away from a herky-jerky kind of driving. There's vehicle suspensions that people have looked at. Then there's cabin level mitigation. So there are passive seats and active seats. So passive seats like gimbal type of seats, active seats that have active vibration cancellation. There is cabin temperature, lighting. You try to make the environment more comfortable. The key thing is that if, for example, motion sickness is associated with sweating and nausea, so if you lower the temperature, if you increase the AC, that can help a little bit. Again, it's a highly reactive solution. It's a highly, once there is a symptom, then you try to do something about that symptom. This passenger level mitigation, there are lots of patents developed around visual displays and stimuli. There's some crazy solutions about doing a neural implant to block the signal that is being generated by the vestibular organs. Really practical solutions. But the point is that there's a vast array of solutions that are being explored, and this just shows, from the entire range of the road and external environment to the vehicle control, to the vehicle chassis and suspension, to what happens in the vehicle cabin and the vehicle occupant. If this is the entire system that we're dealing with, then there are solutions that target the passenger. That's the behavior training. That's the, any wearable. There are the solutions that target the infrastructure design or path navigation. There's active suspension of the vehicle. There's vehicle control and navigation modulation. There's, in the cabin design, there's the HVAC, AC, heating, those kind of things. There's passenger stimuli, there's seats and restraints. So this is sort of the entire array of solutions that are possible. Now in this, what we do, what is our core innovation? There's a subset of this. Many of the solutions that you see, they touch upon all the physical elements of what can be done to mitigate the issue. But the innovation that we bring is, again, the combination that I mentioned earlier. In the case of a driver, what addresses or fixes the situation was a combination of anticipation and preemption, that combination. So that is what we try to address here. So anticipation for us, we achieve anticipation via computer algorithms because you can make very high fidelity predictions now. There's so much data. In fact, in sort of the simple scenario today, if I say I want to go from here to the airport, Google Maps will tell me exactly the directions I should take. And if those maps were, if the directions were fed into an autonomous vehicle, then the autonomous vehicle will simply follow those directions. So now I know at what point in time is there going to be a right turn or a left turn, or is there going to be a stop or an acceleration. That could be tuned in real time. Not only that, if you add in now the information associated with the vehicle, am I driving a Prius or am I driving a Ford F-150? Though they have different size, different CGs, different vehicle dynamics. On top of that, if you add any person level information or individual preferences, if you add up all of these layers of data, the ability to predict when there's going to be a motion sickness inducing event and what my reaction to that would be, that prediction can be done very precisely. So now with the advent of big data and then machine learning algorithms, that is very much possible. So historic and real-time data and you can use deterministic and data-based algorithms. That's the prediction part. Now, the next is, what do you do to preempt? What do you do about it? If you can predict, what do you do about it? So there's different hardware that we have developed. This includes passenger stimuli. It includes an active restraint, so seat belts that can tug on a person in different directions, and an active seat, a tip tilt seat. So, for example, and I'll show you some of this in better animation in future slides. So, in a preact scenario, if the system can predict that a right turn is coming up, the preact system is equipped with prediction and preemption. The preemption, let's say, is in the form of a tip tilt seat. So 5 seconds before the turn happens, the tip tilt seat will simply tilt into the turn very gradually at a pace that is so slow that the passengers don't want to feel anything. They won't get startled. And yet, when the turn is happening, because the body is already leaning into the turn, they don't get swung out. And if they don't get swung out, then the movement of the body is restricted, the movement of the head is restricted. So what a driver was doing intentionally, a preact system can achieve that for every passenger in a very subtle manner. So that is the active seat. Another version of this is active restraint. So active restraint is, let's say, again, you're approaching a right turn, and you have a multi-directional seat belt that if you're approaching a right turn, normally your head will get swung to the left, but you have a directionally tensioned seatbelt that will tug you gently into the turn. So that's the hardware component. So again, in terms of implementation, what we see is that there's a control part which can be integrated into the vehicle's electronic control unit. There could be a standalone module. Some of this is driven by how do we bring this to practice. Yes, please.
This modern speak about the body is moving more like that, right?
Exactly. Yeah. We reduce the conflict, exactly. And first of all, we reduce the uncontrolled motion of the body. So when, for example, there's a sudden inertial event that happens, which is turning, inertial event is something that where there's acceleration involved, and the body then reacts to that acceleration. Versus if you have already done something to adjust the posture of the body, that when that acceleration event happens, the impact of that acceleration will be greatly minimized. Why? Because you're already leaning into the turn, and therefore the gravity is sort of canceling out the centripetal acceleration, and therefore the amount of swing will be reduced. So this just shows the system in action. That here's a preact equipped vehicle where let's say you have embedded the seat with various haptic motors, vibrotactile motors, and let's say a right turn comes up, and before the turn happens, you activate these motors that produce a gentle buzz, and that sort of forewarns the passenger what's about to happen. And in reaction to that, then via trained behavior, they know that, oh, there's something is buzzing, which means right turn is coming up, therefore I should lean into the turn. So that's the that's one version, which is based on stimuli. And we've looked at many kinds of stimuli. We've looked at vibrotactile stimuli, we've looked at audio, we've looked at lights. But this you call it the light pack because it's very easy to integrate. It's low cost and simple to integrate within a given system. Then this is the active seatbelt that I mentioned. So again, the technology exists, the hardware exists, but it's a matter of optimally integrating it with the hardware and the software together. So in this instance, again, slightly before the right turn, the seat belts would tug the passenger into the turn. This is medium cost, medium complexity. And then the last one is, this is what we refer to as the active seat, that again, this is a tip tilt seat. So even it's not just for right turn and left turn, it's also for acceleration and deceleration. That if you're going to brake very hard, all you need to do is tilt the seat backward just a little bit so that the body doesn't get swung forward as hard. These are, in fact, I'll show you what the status of our testing is at the moment. But this is the higher cost, higher complexity. There are regulatory concerns in adopting a technology like this. There's safety concerns in implementing something like this. So the overall architecture, I will spend, I know this is a really busy kind of slide, but I'll still spend a few minutes. Let's see here. So there's this upper layer, which we refer to as the data center. You are measuring real-time data, and you have historically collected data, and this is what provides the data for making accurate predictions. This is the mid-level. These are the vehicle-level algorithms. So one is the standard, for example, the self-driving algorithm. But to that, you tag along another, which is the pre-act algorithm, which not only is telling the vehicle where to go, but is also making a prediction of when the events are going to happen that will cause motion sickness, or that can cause motion sickness. And with these two algorithms running together, then you go to the lower level of the vehicle. This is where the various vehicle level hardware exists. And then there are various triggering commands that are sent from the pre-act algorithm to whether it's the active seat, or it's the active restraint, or it's the passenger stimuli, and even to the vehicle navigation module. Based on a prediction of what is going to produce motion sickness, you can adjust the driving profile. So that's the overall architecture. This is just a comparison of the various IP, various technologies that we've seen. I mean, this maybe the highlight of this is, as any researcher would claim, that we have the best solution. But more than this, what I'd like to present to this audience is that what we've seen is, in terms of making a robust prediction and using as rich data as possible, that's the prediction element, the combination of various hardware that you can use for the purpose of preemption. At the same time, looking at productivity, like it's to see if the passenger can perform a productive task, how effective and how practical the solution is. Based on the experimental results that I'm going to show you, there is a belief that we have a really effective solution. This is, at the various OEMs and tier ones, there's a lot of R&D that is happening in this space, much of which may not be in the public domain. So I can't really say whether others truly have an effective solution or not. But the key thing here is that I'd like to use this avenue to present to any of the industry partners who might be participants who might be hearing or listening to this talk, that we'd very much like to work together with industry partners. That while there may be existing solutions or solutions that you are going to be working on, this might add another layer to those solutions. In fact, we've now talked to almost 100 industry stakeholders and the tier one suppliers and various OEMs, including tech companies. We've talked to companies like Uber, Lyft, and May Mobility. This shows the value chain, the value that we're generating with the pre-act technology via the automotive tier ones. It flows to the OEMs and potentially tech companies who might become OEMs, and ultimately it flow to the passengers, the occupants. But a big part of our objective was to show proof of concept under realistic conditions. And I wonder, does anyone know where one can show proof of concept under realistic conditions? There are only a few places around the country. Debbie? And city here. And city, yeah. So thank you. Thank you. So this is, so Monica just joined. Monica is a collaborator, worldwide expert on motion sickness. So we're fortunate to have the talent pool here and the incredible resources. So when in our interaction with industry, it became clear that there was a need to show not just Mickey Mouse results, but realistic driving conditions, human subject testing to demonstrate efficacy or whether efficacy or lack of efficacy of the pre-act technology. We got incredible support from CCAT, and that enabled all the subsequent experiments that I'm going to show you. So this experimental proof of concept, we want to show realistic driving conditions, human subject, I already mentioned this, investigate the time horizon of preemption. Should it be 3 seconds preemption, 5 seconds, 7 seconds, 10 seconds preemption? Evaluate the cognitive burden associated with any preemption that you provide. If you're providing, for example, a haptic buzz, is the cognitive burden such that it impacts task productivity? So those are questions that we wanted to answer. then look at various combinations of the interventions that I mentioned. So this is sort of our grand plan. We haven't accomplished everything. We've accomplished a slice of it, and I'll tell you a bit more. To do any of this, to make any of this happen, we needed an experimental test bed. So we bought this at the peak of COVID when every van was being bought for delivery of Amazon and online shopping products. We somehow, 2 hours from here, were able to find this ProMaster cargo van. And then we ended up working extensively on it to retrofit it with. So first of all, one aspect of this I wanted to point out was we created this van to, it's called the Wizard of Oz setup based on a research study that someone conducted in 2015, where you separate out two spaces. There's the researcher space and the driver space in the front, and then this is the human subject or the passenger sitting here. And if you create this curtain, this separation, then you can create an impression for the passenger that they're sitting in a self-driving vehicle. So we maintained that separation. Now, this was extensively equipped with, for example, you see that active seat, the Piptl seat. There's a computer closet here. There's an auxiliary power supply here. We established an HVAC system to provide for comfort. There were safety concerns that we were going to mount a seat in this cargo space. So quite a bit of time, effort, planning, and execution that got us to this van, which you'll get to see later this afternoon if you'd like. We call it the Lab on Wheels. This is the active seat, the typical seat that we bought. It so happens that the gaming world seems to be crazy about typical seats, and we were trying to build our own, and it so happened that for, I don't know, $3,000 or $4,000, you can buy a fully built typical seat, so we bought that. But we had to make changes to it, so we ended up hacking into the controls and doing the servo system or the tuning of the controllers ourselves. But this shows a plot here. For example, the purple line is the predicted acceleration. This is the predicted acceleration. And before even the acceleration happens, you start tilting the seat so that the peak of the tilt happens at the peak of the acceleration, and then you gradually bring the seat back to normal. This is showing an example of 8 seconds of preemption for the case of a seat. But in other instances, we have worked with about 3 seconds of preemption for the haptic stimuli. Yes, please. Yeah.
So is the empty book more vulnerability and determining how during meetings what the draw?
Drawn power is, yes, it's a very valid question. We haven't done a power budget, but it's a valid question that has come up multiple times and something that we would like to address. We haven't done that calculation just yet. And my guess is that if you're driving in a city with lots of right and left turns and a lot of, brakes and acceleration, then there should be quite a bit more power consumption. And maybe in a future technology solution, that is where the system on its own determines that for this kind of driving condition, in the mix of all the preemptions, use more of the haptic stimuli, because that's very low power, versus in other scenarios, you could lean on this a bit more. More than intended on the meaning part. So this is the haptic motor solution. So we looked at many different kinds of haptic motors and ended up going with the eccentric rotating mass. And we embedded those into various locations here and created an arrangement so that the information that we were trying to convey to the passenger was intuitive, was distinguishable, just didn't feel like any other vibration, didn't startle the passenger. So those are the factors. We used the ERMs. And for the haptics of again, we went through a bunch of different a matrix of possibilities, but then we ended up with half a second on, half a second off, and 3 cycles. So that was the haptic input we provided in 4 locations to inform the passenger of an upcoming right turn or an upcoming left turn or an upcoming braking event. This is some of the electronics hardware that we developed to drive those haptic motors. Extensive. So we had the advantage of having Monica on our team, and Monica has developed extensive instrumentation in our previous research, so we built upon that. There's SEMGs to measure muscle activity. There's a headband with sensors. We can use the Naruko marker to measure yaw. This is very difficult to measure the yaw motion. It doesn't align with any axis of gravity, so that's why we used this an image processing based sensing. So we have various sensors. This shows the entire arrangement. This is the head belt. This is the wearable, the chest belt. That is just the SEMG sensors. These are a bunch of IMUs. That is the Empatica watch or wearable that measures various physiological data. So there's all the instrumentation, significant amount of wiring and communication, multiple Arduinos, GPS, several IMUs. This is the wristband, Empatica. And of course, this is what my team does reasonably well. We like to build hardware, whether it's electronic or mechanical, extensive programming to collect the data. The initial test that we ran, I don't know how we're doing of time. Okay. Okay. So the first of all the pre-act modules that I told you about, including stimuli or active seat or active seatbelt, the results that I want to show you today are focused on the stimuli, haptic stimuli. So this is what we went in with first. It was sort of the lowest hanging fruit. And in wrist, we looked at two factors. What is the motion sickness response and what is the impact on task performance? We thought we'd bring in those two things. There was a ribbon subject study that was designed. And again, this is all the work of my PhD student, Nishant. A lot of guidance from Monica. Thank you. There were 3 test conditions that we looked at, and maybe I'll go through this a little carefully. So this is a scenario where the first test condition, where the passenger stimuli was on and there's no task. So you're providing passenger stimuli, but there's no task. This is a test condition where passenger stimuli is off, but there is a task. And in the third case, there's both of these are on. So a key thing that we compare, for example, would be TC2 versus TC3, where without the passenger stimuli and with the passenger stimuli while the passenger is performing a task. We didn't consider a situation with off and off because there's extensive previous research and studies that have been done. So we used those studies as the baseline. We did, in the sequence of conducting these tests, we used a Latin square randomization to minimize learning effects. We did a recruitment with certain limits. We wanted to avoid children and we wanted to avoid older individuals. Again, there's some correlation between gender and middle age that could offset our results. So initially we wanted to keep it as adults in this age range. And we also asked them to self-report, when we were recruiting these participants, to self-report their motion sickness susceptibility. So this is, this is the range. So females, males, so 20 females, 15 males. These are their self-reporting. So for example, 4 people say their own self-reporting of motion sickness susceptibility is 4. 4 said low, 6 said moderate, 3 said high. We try to include a mix of various people. We allow people to drop out of the study at any time because this may not be the most fun study to be a part of. So indeed, we had 30% attrition, which we were forewarned. And then this is the sequence of us conducting the test. So there was the reception part where you go through the standard consent. You have them measure the height, weight, have them fill out a questionnaire, give them an overview of the instrumentation. We show them the van setup because they would first come in, go through this reception, and then would be shown the van. And then they'd be driving in the van, and then there'd be some post-van data that we collected after they were done riding in the van. And again, I'll show you what the results are. A critical part of this was for them to report themselves what their motion sickness was. This is a scale that was developed by Dr. Monica Jones, and we use that same scale. where, again, qualitatively, we provided descriptions of what 0 means, what 10 means. We provided them many instances of, motion sickness can involve um, sweating, can involve nausea. We gave them high-level guidelines that 0 to 4 is low motion sickness, 4 to 7 is moderate, 7 to 10 is very high. And we let them decide what they wanted to report. This was the overall drive. The run was about 20 minutes, and it was done at every 90-second interval. So in all, there were 16 measurements for each individual. Well, remember I mentioned about task performance. So we did design a range of tasks, and then we said, let's go from low level to high level. So a combination of low and high level cognitive burden tasks. So low level would look something like this, like spot the difference, insert a word, click on the largest circles, and all of this, and a large circle. So a lot of these are visual. A lot of these is visual and perception. So these are the low cognitive tasks. The higher cognitive tasks involve reading and comprehension. So you read something, there's a map and finding path on a map. There's some basic maths tasks. There is patterns. So higher cognitive burden. So again, we wanted to have this mix to then report what the task performance turns out to be. Next, MCT. So again, learning from what Monica has done in the past, we developed tracks in MCT, these drive paths that emulate both city driving and highway driving. The particular loops that we generated included 13 stop events, 18 left and right turn events, 18 left and 10 right turn events. And per test, we went through 3 loops of the same thing. In our case, because there was the aspect of preemption, so we had to plan for preemption time. The events couldn't be so close that there wasn't time to preempt. So we designed this track for 3 seconds of preemption time. By the way, this is for the stimuli system. For the active seat system, those are tests that are being performed right now as we speak. They've been designed and being performed right now. They are because you're moving a bigger mass of this active seat. We are going with a slightly higher preemption time. Instead of 3 seconds, that's more like 6 seconds. If you change that time, that changes the spat, because between one right turn and another left turn, you just need more time. So there's quite a bit of, it seems like a simple thing, but there's quite a bit of planning that goes into coming up with a representative drive path. Then again, to fall within like naturalistic driving criteria, we have a certain range for longitudinal and lateral accelerations that we hit. Then the next part was, so I showed you all the hardware associated with the preemption hardware. I showed you all the instrumentation hardware. I showed you the MCT track. But then there's a triggering part. So remember, we want to trigger ahead of the event. Because we know the path, so in some ways the experiment was cheating. We know the path ahead of time, so we can trigger manually. But what we found was when we try to trigger manually, like when I say trigger manually, so 3 seconds ahead of an event, you want to trigger, you can trigger manually because you know exactly what the path is. But the spread, the human error in that turned out to be 1.5 seconds. So that being pretty, would mess up our experiments. So instead, what Nishant and Daniel did was they used a GPS-based geofencing to detect when an event was about to happen, and then automatically trigger based on GPS data. And that we were able to get it down to an error of 0.3 seconds, which is 1/10 of the 3 second preemption time. And this that we developed, like all the setup that we're doing, even the results today I'm going to show you are for the active stimuli, but the same setup can be used for the active restraint, active seatbelt, active seat, and so on. Within IRB, again, we got a lot of help and guidance, and Nishant is the one who led this effort to make sure this was done all tests were done in a safe and effective manner. These are the results. So here's a summary slide that shows the results, and the legend. I'll spend a few seconds on the legend. So APS stands for active passenger stimulant. APS. So let's compare the red and the blue. So red and the blue is when the passenger is asked to perform a task So task is one. Passengers asked to perform a task. And it's a range of tasks. There's multiple questions, and from low cognitive to high cognitive burden. With the APS off versus APS on. So when you see when APS is on, there's that reduction in motion sickness. And what are we reporting? That motion sickness score, if you recall, the 0 to 10 score, and over a period of, I think this is about 22 minutes or so. So that is the reduction in motion sickness that we're seeing, and across 24 subjects, and for each subject, multiple loops that they went through. The statistical analysis of this data shows that this result that I'm showing you, this reduction, has very strong significance, statistical significance, so really low p-value. In addition to this, there's also a qualitative preference. So we asked people qualitative questions. So there was also a very strong qualitative preference. Do you want something like this, a forewarning system? And the answer predominantly was yes. I'll show you a bit more granularity in this data. So these are the low susceptibility people, mean score and median score. And again, primarily comparing the red against the blue. So you see that drop there. Red against the blue, you see that drop in motion sickness, self-reporting. Which is low susceptibility. This is the medium susceptibility, folks. Again, a drop in the mean score, and similarly a drop in the median score. And these are the high susceptibility folks. In the high susceptibility folks, it seemed like that over time, there's sort of a saturation effect that happens, that over time, whether you have the active passenger stimuli system, like the preemptively triggered APS system, on or off, didn't matter that much. But the rate at which motion sickness is cumulative. It's like an integrator. It's like you keep hitting the person with these inertial events, and their sense of motion sickness or discomfort grows. So that rate of growth, there was a considerable difference between the presence or absence of the passenger stimuli system. These are the question of the qualitative questions of people. If you ask them, do you want a system like this? So that's very large percentage of people said that they preferred something like this. This was the task performance. So what is the impact of task performance? These are the tasks I showed earlier. So PREACT, what we showed was reduces motion sickness without any adverse impact on task performance. So we didn't improve task performance, but we didn't negatively impact it either, in spite of the fact that there was an additional stimuli that was being provided to the passenger. Now, in future PREACT systems where there is no such stimuli, rather you just have a tip-tilt seat, when we expect to see that maybe task performance might also get better, but those are experiments that are ongoing. So here's my summary slide. What we showed was a combination of prediction and preemption via vibration stimuli or the haptic stimuli provides reduction in motion sickness. In doing so, there is no adverse impact on productive tasks, whether the system is on or off. In addition to just these two things that I reported, motion sickness I reported, and task performance we reported. In addition to this, there's a lot of physiological data also that we have collected that we're in the process of analyzing. So to see, okay, are we keeping, for example, heart rate in better control? Are we keeping perspiration in better control? Because we know that motion sickness, higher level of motion sickness, correlates with higher degree of perspiration. So some of those physiological responses we're still analyzing. There are several additional PREACT modules that are under development and testing. So like I mentioned, this was all the passenger stimuli, but right now the active seat is being tested, and the active restraint is being developed. So we continue to develop and test these various modules. We are actively seeking industry partners. We have shown some very promising data, and the data continues to flow. We believe that this has demonstrated the efficacy of the system, but to now take it to the next step, we are very actively looking for industry partnerships. We have had industry mentors, by the way. All along, we've had guidance and inputs from the industry, but now this could move on to the next stage of co-development. This solution, by the way, it is of course relevant to future autonomy. But like I said, a small slice of the current market, which is family vehicles, or anyone who has a situation where passengers sitting in the back row could benefit from this technology right now. So there's relevance right now, and there's relevance in the future. That is my last slide. Let me just thank our sponsors, CCAT, the biggest logo the biggest sponsor actually. Amtrak Transportation through innovation partnerships has been very supportive. There's a Michigan State that has an office of OFME, and this is future mobility and electrification. And then MEDC via an advanced grant program, we've received support from there. So again, thank you so much for the opportunity. We find the project very exciting, and we hope we can bring a meaningful solution to the industry. I think the help and support we've received from Humphrey, from MCity, from CCAT is incredible. We're very grateful for that. Thanks.
Question from the audience here in person? Well, I have more than 10 questions online, so okay, you have a question that you have priority from me.
I think it further on, or further correctly, but might the both want to do it. This student in high school online. So I just thought,
Yes.
and that seems good in previous.
It did not. Yeah. So it did not. It's the same level. So what we did was we closely looked at task performance in terms of how many questions were completed in a given amount of time, how many questions were completed correctly. So whether it was called, right? So what we found was that there was no statistically significant difference between that task performance when PREACT was turned on versus when it was turned off.
And our thing was the edit. Usually the higher correlation. People see it decrease.
That's right. Yes.
Reading.
Yes. Yes. So in theory, and hopefully it will be proven correct or discorrect, or incorrect in coming months, is that while with APS or PREACT, active passenger stimuli system, we're reducing the motion sickness, we're also increasing the cognitive burden, right? The load, because you are telling the passenger something. There's more to the process, and maybe that is canceling things out. So when we implement the PREACT active seat, we will not burden the passenger, right? So we're just moving, and we're moving very gently, that they barely even perceive that anything is going on. In that scenario, I'd expect that, with the reduction in motion sickness, task performance will go.
And they're all night long with bring the meat in order of anything or more.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Brown.
No, there wouldn't be a drop in every single person's, but I think that question is granular enough, is best directed to Nishant.
Yeah.
And
just
yeah. Would you, Ninas, and would you consider median to be a little better representation in these scenarios? No? Okay.
I love the matter.
Yeah. Yeah, some differentiation. Yeah, low, medium. Thank you. Thanks a lot. No, well, thank you. Yeah.
Well, since I think I have because yeah. So sorry, you mentioned you seeking the industry partnership. There's actually a question online asking you, particularly for your predicted part of it.
Yeah.
What data you will be required for your technology to optimally perform in terms of prediction? I am assuming the question is asking you in terms of how do you get the data from the vehicle to feed to your API?
So right now, in just demonstrating the technology, because our path is known, right? Our path is completely known. We're simply proving that if you could predict your path accurately enough, can you reduce motion sickness? And that is what we're demonstrating.
Yeah.
The prediction part, though, that is based on data that we don't ourselves have access to. Right. So that is data. It's related to driving data. It's related to infrastructure data. There's physical models of the vehicle dynamics. It's biomechanical models of a human.
Yeah.
So that is a part where we haven't yet gotten to collating all of that data and start making predictions. We're just working on the belief that even with the current levels of prediction, you have a very good idea of when if you say, yeah, I want to go from here to the airport, so well, you get to the airport actually within a minute of the predicted time. And that is in a future part of our project. Our goal is to
Assuming the data, many of these data are in a very short term in terms of the sort of the prediction in the next few seconds.
That's right.
Coming from the infrastructure and the vehicle itself in terms of the dynamics and the path, the mood.
Exactly. So, for example, there's a pothole, right? That's a very much a real-time thing that may not have existed a week ago, but exists now. But that pothole has been detected by 100 vehicles that have gone through that path earlier today. And if that information is being fed to some central database, and if I have access to that database, then I'll know that, well, there wasn't a pothole a week ago, but today there is.
Just hold on that question because there is a question on pothole. So there's a question asking you, will the quality of the road surface impact the occupant motion sickness? For example, the pothole.
Yeah, so it's very interesting that question is asked. So I'm from India, and when I was growing up, the roads were horrible. Now the roads are much better, but the roads are horrible. And man, when no matter where you went, as kids, like I mentioned, as such, we were more prone to motion sickness, and those roads didn't help. So there's definitely longitudinal acceleration that one has to worry about, lateral acceleration, and then also vertical acceleration. But the inner ears, the otolite organs are sensitive to all three directions.
Yeah.
At least driving in the US or North America or where the transportation system is more advanced, one doesn't have to worry as much about vertical component. I mean, a pothole, in our present context, what will a pothole do? It'll actually make the vehicle slow down or brake harder. So that in direct consequence will have an impact to what PREACT does. But we're not, like right now, we're not designing the system for vertical perturbations on the road surface.
Okay. And I see the hardware portion in terms of the lateral,
Yeah.
but the longitudinal, we use constraint system for the longitudinal.
So we use a tiltal seat, so 3-degree of freedom. So you can, it can tilt side to side, but it can tilt back and forth. So for the longitudinal acceleration, so for example, you hit the brake, then the seat has the ability to lean back.
Okay. And so that compensates the lot.
Exactly.
Power.
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
And then the restraint, similarly, the restraint has features to help the body to the left, to the right, or pull it back a little bit.
Yeah. There's also, I thought it's an interesting question, so I might ask you, what would, the safety systems, the question say there's a lot of electronics and controls in your APS system. If something goes wrong, the system shut down and become a normal sheep or something.
No, that is a standard. That is a standard safety feature that if we were to bring this to the market, that any fault detection in the system would just cause the system to shut down.
Okay.
We also are envisioning a situation where if the passenger has the ability to choose their preference, that they can say that I want a more aggressive amount of preemption, a less amount of preemption, I want more of the seat movement, I want less of the seat movement. So that kind of thing would be part of the user preference.
Yeah. There's another question I thought is interesting is that I'm assuming the question the people who are asking say, I'm assuming the participant did not have has visual access to the roadway, no window in the when you showed. Do we know how effective compared to providing visual access to and do you think it's performed better than the existing?
That's a very valid question. So blocking the glue it's blocking the access or the sensory input through the eyes. So oftentimes, for kids, they say rather than look down, look up and look outside, because then whatever movement of that is the true movement is being captured by the eye, you're able to reduce the conflict. We're envisioning a situation where ultimately if someone really wants to enjoy the scenery, then sure. But to reclaim productivity, we want to come up with a system where they're able to work on a screen. And in that scenario, blocking off, I think, is a better thing, because then you don't have the peripheral vision of this perception. Something is moving. Now your users focus on your tablet, your device, your tabletop, and the swaying of the head and the body is being reduced because of these various active seat or active restraint systems.
Thank you.